666. The Mark of America, Seed of the Beast. The Apostle John's New Testament revelation unfolded. All rights reserved. No part of this book may be used or reproduced in any manner whatsoever without written permission of the author or publisher, except by a reviewer who may quote brief passages. Revelation chapter 13, verse 18. Quote, "Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 14. Quote, "Now the weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold." Unquote. Revelation chapter 2, verse 13. Quote, "I know thy works, and where thou dwellest, even where Satan's seat is." Unquote. Revelation chapter 13, verse 2. Quote, "And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth as the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave him his power, and his seat, and great authority." Unquote. Revelation chapter 16, verse 10. Quote, "And the fifth angel poured out his vial upon the seat of the beast, and his kingdom was full of darkness, and they gnawed their tongues for pain." Unquote. Forward. Courage has been defined as the ability to face danger, difficulty, uncertainty, or pain without being overcome by fear of being deflected from a chosen course of action. It was with courage that the early explorers set out on oceanic voyages in a world that was determined as being flat, knowing that a possibility existed that they would eventually fall off the end of the earth. It was with courage that Galileo stood against the powerful Catholic Church and defended truth when imprisonment was the consequence. It is with courage that the foundations of human intelligence evolve, as those so endowed with its rare strengths and tendencies stand up against preconceived and established quote-unquote truths, which fall by the sword of the real truth, wielded by those so courageous. It will be with great courage that the reader takes this book in hand and endows his or her limited understanding of reality with real truth. If you do not have the courage to face the possibility that your family, friends, community, or church will condemn you and cast you out as a deceived or insane heretic of established thought, imprisoning you in a cell of isolation and rejection, then do not read this book. If you do not have the courage to seek for an understanding amidst the falsehoods and dogma established within the esoteric walls of organized religion and the closed doors of politics, then do not read this book. This book is for the brave, the honest, the seeker of truth and wisdom. It is a disclosure of truth that has been hidden from the minds of scholars, popes, priests, and kings for hundreds of years. It presents an explanation of the foundation of the human condition that is long overdue in a world that is crumbling under the pressure of its own ignorance. But most fascinating of all, the reader will delve into a mystery that has perplexed the whole of Christianity and has brought undeserved fear and desperation to millions of people who believe the Bible to be the literal and ultimate Word of God. With this same Word, By using the references of the same Bible, the author has brought to the world an understanding that is overwhelmingly specific and direct in its interpretation and unwaveringly exact in its description of the most talked about and studied book in modern religion. Unlike other works authored with the same purpose, to explain the book of Revelation, this book crushes all the uninspired rhetoric put forth in the past and present works, which are full of imaginative prose and interpretation that, when contrasted with the truth, will surely fall significantly. Truly, there can be no other source of the explanations presented herein than the mouth of the original author himself, John the Beloved. This is where courage must present itself with definitive and deliberate rationale in the mind of the reader. This is where the claim that the author, that he was taught personally by John, must be weighed in contrast to the threats of excommunication or being deceived by a charlatan. If this work is true, it is the greatest book ever written concerning the true purpose and meaning of the book of Revelation and its relevance to the world. Its omens must be heeded, its information disclosed, in order to prepare a world to view itself as it really is, and not how its inhabitants have been deceived into accepting it. No one who reads this book will walk away as the same person. Its enlightenment will enhance the truth seeker's perception and confuse the skeptic's arguments. Windows will be fashioned in the walls of darkened boxes in which most people live their lives, from which a light will illuminate the reality that they indeed live in a box. The masterful way in which John wrote his words is revealed in this book by commentary that supports the truths that he expected to disclose, apocalypse in Greek, to the people of the latter days. His truths confound all those who have set themselves up above others as leaders, quote unquote, called of God to reveal the truth to the world. God cannot be a respecter of persons and maintain the due benevolence given to such a title. If he has something to say, he will say it to one and all the same. Finally, the apocalypse has come. The truth is revealed, and to the courageous, who read it from the beginning to the end, this book will promise the realization of the profound statement, "The truth will set you free." Have courage and be set free. Preface. Sections 1 through 9 present a philosophical and logical view of the human condition. Besides the title of each section and its last paragraph, no religious connotation or explanation is given by the author. The purpose for this is to give a different perspective of the meaning behind the biblical New Testament book of Revelation. Some readers have no experience in scriptural text and can easily become bored and disinterested in reading comments and quotes with which they are not familiar or comfortable. Furthermore, to many people, the Bible is a compilation of religious hopes and dreams which have little to do with the reality of everyday life, written, they believe, by men who lived long ago in another culture and time inconsistent with their own. The author of Revelation, the man recognized as John the Beloved, understands the human condition better than any other person alive upon the earth. Sections 1 through 9 give his personal perspective in contemporary prose. These have been written so that there is no confusion of what John intended the reader to understand in reading his words. His esoteric and figurative expressions used throughout the book of Revelation tend to confuse a reader when not read in context with what was understood in the culture and time period in which it was written. Sections 1 through 9 provoke thought and contemplation, and must be read with reason and logic, the very essence of their intention. Each section leads to the next and culminates in a final statement that relates its meaning with the symbolism used in the book of Revelation. A strong foundational understanding will be gained by careful consideration of these first 9 sections. After reading them, the mind will be prepared to receive an understanding of one of the greatest revelation ever given by a mortal man to his fellow beings. Chapter 1. The Corruption of Man. Giving science the due respect it demands from rational thinkers, let's assume that the human race has evolved into a typical species in the animal kingdom. How then, through this supposed evolutionary process, did our species evolve so dramatically different than any other species in the natural world and become atypical? Where does there exist another species, genus, family, order, class, or phylum in which its constituents are, by their own choice, divided into class structures, where one individual dominates and controls another in order to benefit itself exclusively? Outside the human species, where does there exist another animal group that consciously sees its other members as lower class, middle class, or upper class? Where else are there caste types set wherein by birth alone a creature is assigned a specific honor that sets it in prominence above others? Where in the animal kingdom do the natural instincts of one member serve itself instead of the whole? A weak argument held by some is that there are some alpha males and females throughout the natural world who are given prominent distinction by nature's law. Others might suppose that the queen bee, for example, by the majestic nature of her birth, warrants the worship and class distinction she is given. In reality, the queen bee is a slave to the community. Any others born of the same royal birth are immediately killed, because there is only need for one to fill the role for which she exists. The alpha of any group has little to do with birthrights, but is instead dependent upon the age and strength of the one given the title. If the human race followed this natural law, then the strong African slave would have had dominance over the smaller white landowner without argument. But as it is, the smaller human is able to subdue the larger and stronger, not because of any law of nature, but because of the manipulation of these laws by man. The laws of nature have a single purpose. That purpose is to assure the perpetuation of the species. Alpha males and females are supported in order to assure a hierarchy that works well for the sake of the whole, just as queen bees are coddled and protected to ensure offspring. Regardless of these instincts, the natural law of the animal kingdom does not implement rules and laws that have the potential of destroying entire species. Each species acts within the well-balanced realm of its own environs to ensure that future generations will exist. Instinctual behavior demands this of all species except one, Homo sapiens. Homo sapiens means wise one. The term is taken from the scientific classification given as the genus Homo and the species Sapiens. Of course, those who invented the scientific classification system did not see themselves as stupid creatures, and thus were so inclined to include their genus in comparison to the rest of the animal kingdom as intelligent and wise sapiens. These wise ones of the animal kingdom came up with a theory in which they could, through their self-proclaimed wisdom, logically support their classification system. This is the theory of evolution. Its premise is based on what is termed natural selection, which again, as they suppose, is wise because they thought of it. Natural selection can best be described as an evolutionary mechanism that occurs when some individuals of a population are better able to adapt to their environment and subsequently produce more offspring. Nature, in effect, selects which members of a population are fit to survive long enough to reproduce. Differential reproductive success between individuals is the key. Those who produce more offspring have a greater influence on the gene frequencies of the next generation. In easier terms for the common wise ones to understand, survival of the fittest. It would seem, therefore, that if this wise theory could be substantiated as a true law of nature, it would apply to all of the animal kingdom. Yet, if science has proven that a species exists to maintain and perpetuate itself, then the theory of evolution has no verifiable application in the ant world, for example, in which the strongest, the soldiers, could surely kill every worker and every queen and take over the hill. Likewise, an alpha male could kill all other males, he being the strongest of the group, as well as an alpha female drive off or kill the other females, thus assuring her prominence and future posterity. If only the strongest survive, how have insect species existed for millions of years without any indication of evolution or subjection to the theorized law of natural selection? Could it be that Darwin, the so-called father of the theory of evolution, was not paying attention to the ants crawling up his pants as he crouched on the ground watching the birds? Furthermore, if Homo sapiens evolved from other primates, why aren't other primates evolving? The more the species, sapiens, learns about itself and its environs, the more it begins to realize that there are more than just two kingdoms on this planet. There are three: the plant kingdom, the animal kingdom, and the human kingdom. Because the human kingdom follows none of the instinctual and natural laws that the other two kingdoms follow, it cannot be logically included under their classifications. The plant kingdom cannot survive without the animal kingdom, and the animal kingdom cannot survive without the plant kingdom. But both can do rather well without the human kingdom. In fact, because of the human kingdom, the plant and animal kingdoms are being destroyed, but not by natural law, but by wise human law. The laws of nature create a balance and order some refer to as a symbiotic state that perfectly sustain the perpetuation of the creatures for which these laws exist. The lion eats no more than that which satisfies its hunger. When its hunger is satisfied, it does not kill unless it feels like its life is threatened. The flower takes no more sun and water than what it needs to grow and flourish. The laws of nature uphold the design of all creatures to sustain the life of their species, and also maintain the environment from which they take this life. Creatures beholden to these natural laws do not have the ability to see themselves as individual and separate parts, but fulfill the measure of their creation in order to sustain the whole. No individual buffalo looks at its herd and makes the decision not to mate, so that the herd doesn't get any bigger. No plant or animal subjected to the laws of nature worries about tomorrow, nor do they look up at the stars and wonder what those shining lights are. Humans are not subjected to the laws of nature. Yes, they are affected by the natural world, but they stand alone from all other genuses in their ability to consciously rebel against any law they so choose. If a wise one chooses to have sex for pure enjoyment, for example, it can do so by superseding natural law with the human law of birth control. This natural earth is not subjected to human law, but follows the course it has been following for millions of years. It wasn't until the wise ones showed up that the natural law began to be violated and disregarded. Natural law fills the atmosphere with clean, pure air that brings energy to the plants and animals it sustains. It fills pristine streams and rivers with colorful and healthy plants and wildlife. It assures the calm rest of winter, brings the refreshing life of spring. In all things, it creates a balance and order for the benefit of all those subjected to it. There is only one thing that keeps nature from doing what it does best: the corruption of man. Chapter 2. The Dragon. How can it be the fault of humans that by consequence of their innate desires, they live contrary to the laws of nature? If they see themselves as the wise ones, they can no longer exist in harmony with a perfectly balanced world. This is because they recognize their abilities and their unique intelligence, which allows them to rule and have dominion over other creations that live by instinctual and natural law. Though some groups of indigenous tribes found that this harmony with nature worked well for them, the majority of the wise ones soon assimilated these less intelligent, as they were judged, groups into the expanding sea of quote-unquote civilized humanity. A human infant hasn't a chance of survival in the natural world without something distinguishing it from the rest of the self-equipped and instinctually motivated species of the animal kingdom. It is incapable of defending itself. Unlike other members of the animal kingdom, it has no fight or flight response that lessens the incidence of death, as these instinctual protective measures do in other species. This further disproves Darwin's theory of evolution and the concept of survival of the fittest. Humans simply do not properly fit into the balance of nature. An infant has no fur to protect it from the cold, no camouflage to hide it, no pungent smell to ward off predators, and no overwhelming natural strength possessed by its adult protectors to utilize the fight or flight response to their advantage. Modern scientists speculate and hypothesize about how Homo sapiens were able to exist and flourish for thousands of years amongst ferocious predators, but none of their conclusions make sense or seem logical. Humans, by the weakness of their nature, are an easy source of prey for stronger predatory animals. There are two simple differences that set the human species apart from the rest of the animal kingdom: self-awareness and the ability to reason. This ability is not instinctual, and did not come from years of cognitive evolution as some would suggest. From scientific speculations, a few wise ones formulated the myth of quote-unquote cavemen, whose grunts and groans eventually developed into a communal language of cooperation, which aided the success of the species. If this were the case, science would see the same development in other animal species, but it does not and will not, because these other species haven't the ability to reason, nor are they aware of the self as an individual part of the greater whole possessing the ability to exercise free will in order to maintain individuality. This self-awareness and the ability to reason can appropriately be called selfishness. Humans are the only purely selfish creatures in nature. After their basic needs of food and procreative sex are met, Their selfishness motivates them to eat for pleasure, have sex for pleasure, and further establish their individuality from the rest of the whole of humanity. Therefore, selfishness becomes a natural human tendency by reason of their own existence. Recognizing selfishness for what it truly is establishes a positive definition instead of the negative connotation generally recognized as improper behavior. The individual is the essence of the wise ones. To find this quote-unquote essence, one must experience a lifetime of choices in which actions contrary to the whole are taken in order to maintain a balance of self-awareness and individuality. Humans divide themselves into family units to develop and maintain individuality. A male and female do not commit to lifelong partnerships to contribute to the whole, but to maintain self-awareness. Quote-unquote love is a value placed on something outside of the self. Being in love is a selfish, abstract human creation. One, quote-unquote, loves if he or she contributes to the individuality of the one being loved. When there no longer exists a feeling of support for the individual, love no longer exists. A woman, for example, will stay in love with a man as long as she feels the man sees her as his quote-unquote one and only. The most beautiful example of womanhood, or any other emotional support that builds her self-perception that she is uniquely distinguished from other women. Humans may also form partnerships with those of the same sex, with no intent to procreate, but to maintain the essence of their individuality. When a male, for example, senses he is valued by another male, but his individual preference does not fit the accepted quote-unquote norm, the union is emotionally justified because it appears natural and appropriate to both men whose individuality is supported by it. Children are not consciously desired to guarantee the perpetuation of the species, but to give more credibility and support to the individuals who create them. A father and mother validate themselves by their children. Most family rules and expectations are set not to allow the children to become individuals, but to further the selfish desires of the parents to maintain their own individuality. When a child eventually becomes aware that his or her existence is no longer dependent upon the parent, and that his or her self is more important than the whole of the family, a rebellion ensues. This ultimately brings heartache and instability to the family unit, which was instituted not for the sake of the child, but for the parent. To further maintain the essence for which they exist, humans place values on other abstractions that can more easily establish a state of individuality among them. Material possessions become a distinction of class and prestige, distinctions of accumulation of knowledge, not intelligence, set one individual apart from another by allowing the opportunity for self-worth to foundationalize individuality. A college degree or employment experience that none other has achieved helps maintain this human essence. The color and style of hair, the jewelry adorning the body, and other personalized choices support the individual against the whole. Self-awareness creates the individual human experience, and the ability to reason maintains it. These unique human characteristics determine the balance by which we acquire a personal awareness of the self. If maintained properly, this balance serves us well and gives meaning and purpose to our existence. Individuality is the value placed upon this existence. When this value is compromised, there is no longer balance. Humans recognize balance and imbalance as happiness and unhappiness, respectively. Like love, happiness and unhappiness are abstract emotions felt when the individual receives or doesn't receive recognition for its uniqueness. When one is not acknowledged separately from the whole, the purpose of existence is breached, and the wise one becomes unbalanced, contrary to its nature. The human either exists in a continual state of unhappiness, or seeks to alleviate the discomfort by setting itself apart from the whole, thus fulfilling the measure of its creation. Since humans seek to fulfill the purpose for which they exist, i.e., to be recognized and valued as individuals, they use their superior intelligence to accomplish this goal. Since the goal is individual and has nothing to do with the whole of humanity, whatever or whoever interferes with reaching this goal becomes a detriment to the happiness and balance of the human being. A serpent has long been viewed as a symbol of wisdom and cunningness whose power consumes anything or anyone who stands in the way of its desires. The dragon is an abstract serpentine fantasy contrived to exude power and destruction upon any who dare confront it. Though we fear no fantasy, we must be aware of our innate desires, which have become the dragon that threatens our very existence. Chapter 3. The Beast. The individual pursuit of happiness has led to the rapid intellectual and technological evolution of the human species. Though these advances have come from the wise ones, yearning to fulfill the measure of their creation individually, they have had little effect, if any, on the desired end of their existence, happiness. When more knowledge is acquired by the whole, it has the potential of creating widespread equality and understanding, but this threatens individuality, the purpose of human existence. Knowledge is what is agreed upon through mutual experience and perception. It is not synonymous with real truth, because it changes as other facts are acquired which negate the accepted truth upon which it was based. The accumulation of knowledge does little to bring happiness to a person, except as a distinction that protects or promotes individuality. To protect this self-perception and set a distinction between themselves and others, some seek to acquire superior knowledge that sets them above the masses. When these are accepted as being more knowledgeable, they take advantage of the perception. These gain power over the need of their followers to maintain individuality and feel set apart from others. These become leaders. Some are not convinced of a leader's superior knowledge and understanding, because in doing so, they will lose their own individuality by succumbing to the direction in which the leader has pointed the followers. These rebel against the leader and become enemies of the leader's self-image and power. The first leader recognized in the human experience is the parent who forms a family unit. Through no choice of its own, in its early years, the child becomes an inculcated follower of the traditions, beliefs, and customs, the knowledge, of its parents. The parents base their knowledge on time-honored respect for what has been taught to them. To protect these traditions, parents unite with other quote-unquote followers. They form communities of families that are led in the same direction by whomever or whatever they have chosen as their leader. These leaders protect the knowledge upon which the followers have agreed. These communities form cities and nations based on shared perceptions of individuality. The nations are led by the leaders who have convinced their followers of their superior knowledge and ability to protect the core of their power, the family unit established through individuality. Leaders answer to themselves, or to the images and illusions they have created that support their personal agendas. If the leader has the support of the nation, then the people have been convinced that whomever or whatever guides and gives direction to the leader is truth. In ancient times, humans honored and worshipped their leaders because they were convinced that unseen and powerful gods led and directed them. As knowledge increased and spread to the masses, these unseen gods were replaced with other intangible gods, which had just as much power over the minds and motives of the people as did their mortal leaders. Whatever god is chosen, the leaders maintain control over the people by perpetuating and promoting the god in which the people believe. Unseen gods religiously motivate humans to revere the whole to which the individual belongs, subjecting all to the will of these mysterious forces. These gods are known and accepted because the people have placed their faith and support in mortal leaders who have convinced them of the supernatural essence in which they should believe. It can be profoundly stated that a quote-unquote God is the equivalent of a powerful human motivator. By utilizing this knowledge, leaders establish themselves above others, fulfilling their true nature of individual self-awareness, but are never able to satisfy their followers' desires to arrive at the same awareness. Being the wise ones that they are, humans soon developed a powerful human motivator, a god, that would allow them, whether leader or follower, to maintain the illusion that their existence was indeed leading to a full self-awareness of their individuality. They created specific values placed on each other and the resources of the natural earth. These values would always sustain a continual state of distinction and division, assuring individuality, the balance of human happiness. These values began something like this. The story of Ugg and Thug. A long time ago, long before the discovery of silver and gold, there lived a man named Ugg. Ugg lived in a community of people who prospered well for that time, herding sheep, raising cows, and growing grain. One day, while Ugg was fishing in a stream near his home, he noticed a shiny rock exhibiting its countenance through the crystal clear water. "That's a nice-looking stone," Ugg thought, as he retrieved it from its resting place. As Ugg pondered on the discovery he had made, he wondered what use this pretty rock could have. He decided that although the rock was beautiful, it served him no real purpose, so he threw it back. Now that he had discovered the existence of the rock, he began to notice that the stream bed where he was fishing was full of the peculiar-looking stone. Ugg's neighbor, Thug, was a lazy sort, and spent many a day down by the stream idly dreaming up ways that he could get out of the responsibilities of work that were required of him by the community of people where he lived. One day, Thug noticed the shiny rock that his friend Ugg had discarded. "Hey," thought Thug, "I bet I could convince Ugg's wife that this pretty stone is worth a mammoth meat pie," something Thug loved to eat, but was too lazy to make himself. Thug took the stone and fashioned it into a trinket and gave it to Ugg's wife, who upon seeing it immediately fell in love with its shiny attributes. She made Thug his pie and couldn't wait to show off her new trinket to her friends. "Wow," thought Thug, "if Ugg's wife liked this stone, maybe all the other women will like one too. I'll never have to make another mammoth meat pie again." Thug went down to the stream bed and gathered up all the shiny rocks he could find. When the other men's wives wanted a shiny trinket like Ugg's wife, their husbands searched in vain for the rocks Thug had already taken. The other women were distraught that they could not have a trinket like Miss Ugg. These women began to pester their husbands until the pestering became unbearable. The men went to Thug and asked him for some of his shiny rocks for their wives. "What will you give me for one of these rocks?" Thug asked. "I will build you a fence," said one man. "And I will give you 3 cows to put inside the fence," said another. Soon Thug, the laziest man in town, had the best house, barn, fence, and animals in all the community. Thug spent most of his time looking and digging for the now precious stones. The more he found, the less there were for others to find. It wasn't long before Thug made a list of things for which he could trade his stones. He divided his stones into groups according to size. The littlest stones he traded for a cow, a sheep, or an ox. A bigger stone he gave in exchange for a new shed to be built on his land. And the biggest stones, well, these he kept for himself because he knew he could break them into littler stones that he could trade for practically anything he wanted. Ugg's cow died, and he didn't have any way to procure milk for his growing children. He asked his wife if she would let him have her trinket so he could trade it to his brother, whose wife had one but wanted 2, for one of his cows. Reluctantly, Ugg's wife gave up her trinket so that her children could have milk. Ugg traded the stone for one of his brother's cows. Ugg's brother, Shrug, took the stone, which was way too big for just one cow, and traded it to another neighbor for 6 sheep and 5 bushels of wheat. Ugg's brother never told him that his wife's stone was worth more than just one cow. He knew his brother needed a cow more than he needed a stone that he couldn't eat, wear, or sleep in. So he decided he had done his brother a favor, and for the favor, he would get more for the stone than what he gave for it. This situation went on for some time. Before long, the stones were worth much more to the people of the community than any of their other possessions. One wise man set up a little business by the bank of the stream, where the stones had first been found. His wise premise was to help people save their stones and get more stones by lending them out to others in return for a bigger stone than what they had borrowed in the first place. When this man lent out a stone that was the size of a walnut, he told the borrowers that they would have to pay him back a stone the size of an apple. When the bigger stone was paid back as agreed, the man would then chip off a little bit of the apple-sized stone for himself, and give the person who had deposited his stone in the business a stone which was bigger than what he had originally deposited. "What an easy way to get more stones without finding any or trading anything for them," boasted the man. Since his business seemed to be successful by the bank of the stream, he called his business the bank. Soon the people of the community were spending far more time figuring out ways to get and trade stones than they were raising things to eat, making things to wear, or building houses. It wasn't long before there were lots of stones lying around that no one could eat, wear, or live in. The people began to die from hunger and the cold outside, or they were killed by someone wanting their stones. Ugg analyzed what had happened to his community and called the people together and told them what Thug had done. He explained that Thug had taken advantage of all of them because he didn't want to work like the rest of the community. He made Thug's name known throughout the land as a lazy con artist who took advantage of the people's industry for his own good. His name has been infamous ever since. It wasn't long before Thug killed his brother for speaking against him, and because of Thug's riches and power, no one cared. Our true natures consistently motivate us to maintain our individuality due to our unique awareness that we are different and independent from everything else in the universe. As explained, we are aware of ourself, and we use our ability to reason to experience things that validate our existence, or this individuality. Therefore, we naturally seek out those things that confirm this uniqueness. From our honest perspective, everything in the universe exists for us to use in our experiences to arrive at happiness, which is the balance that we seek. In the above story, Ugg's wife was aware that wearing a trinket set her apart from others. When the other women noticed this difference that set Ugg's wife apart from them, they recognized her uniqueness and believed that they too could become different in the same way. Once all of them possessed the same bracelet, their individualism was diminished. To separate themselves further from each other and reach a state of independent awareness that would bring them balance, happiness, each sought out other things, maybe 2 bracelets or 3 bracelets instead of 1, to recover their distinctiveness. This natural tendency is why humans establish borders, nations, communities, and families, and seek for personal riches and emotional securities such as patriotism, or religious, or group affiliations that separate them from others. Though these things are abstract and are as varied as each particular mind interprets their meaning and value, they have become an important constant and the utmost desire of a wise one in search of his or her natural balance. Even those who do not want borders, nations, communities, or families, and who do not seek material wealth or depend on the emotional securities that distinguish one human from another, still protect their individuality by not belonging to the group of those who do seek after these things. Inevitably, it is impossible for humans not to crave their selfish desires, no matter what they might be. The leaders we choose to lead us are determined by their ability to protect and allow our individuality. The democracies of the world are premised on the ability of the people to choose for themselves the laws and governments that promote their selfish desires. Governments that allow a person the liberty to exist and determine what brings balance to the self, and which guarantee this pursuit of happiness, are unquestionably supported by human nature. These types of governments encourage the perpetual quest for individuality. They promise their supporters the ability to achieve the realization of their selfish dreams. Humans exist on a planet whose natural laws will never satisfy their free-willed intrinsic character. They are not like other creatures of the animal kingdom that have no concept of self-awareness and maintain balance by working with natural law to perpetuate the whole. Working against the laws of nature, human self-awareness supports the individual and sets a unique standard of balance, happiness, for which it continually seeks. Human intelligence and reason has created a powerful entity of motivation that helps maintain this balance. This powerful human motivator is a great beast that has no part of the normal order of the animal world. In other words, the corruption of man has created the dragon, which has given birth to a beast upon whose back the whole of humanity rides. Nothing stands in the way of this dragon and its desires. The beast receives its power from the dragon and reigns throughout the whole earth. Who would want or dare to make war with or attempt to overthrow the beast that fulfills the very essence of human desire? Chapter 4. The Image. Because of their intelligence and ability to reason, the wise ones have progressed and evolved in their ability to protect the self and its desires. Standards of living have been created that determine the measure of happiness associated with human behavior. It might be argued that one who spends many days traveling hundreds of miles by foot to reach a desired destination pales in comparative balance, happiness, to one who can travel the same distance in a matter of minutes in an airplane. If presented with both options of travel, one who has the ability to reason measures each option by the standard that brings the most balance. The innate realm of personal choice that supports each individual creates variables which cannot be ignored when a standard of balance is being sought. One who travels by foot might enjoy the fresh air and the exercise, while the one who travels by airplane might enjoy the time saved. The purpose for the trip must be considered, as well as the desired destination. As the wise ones reason their way to continual advancements in technology and science, they convince themselves that the standard of living necessary to maintain the quintessential balance must remain the purpose and end of these advancements. Their ability to reason supports the idea, for example, that if a person wants to travel from point A to point B, that it would seem logical that whatever can be done to expedite the trip would lend to a more perfect balance, ignoring the laws of nature, which mandate that a 50-ton mass cannot disregard the law of gravity. These wise ones use their superior intellect and free will to find a better way to make the trip in less time. Once they arrive at what they believe to be a more balanced and, in this example, the fastest means of travel, they set a standard by which they measure happiness, balance. Once the standard is set, most humans are convinced that they must measure themselves by this standard. Surely one who walks 300 miles by foot is perceived as foolish if an airplane is available to offer an alternative means of transportation. The end becomes more important than the means to reach it. The end is happiness, and whatever the wise ones must do to reach this end, they will do, no matter what natural law they must circumvent or violate in order to accomplish their goal. The consequences of ignoring the natural laws of the earth have little importance to the wise ones, once their fundamental needs are satisfied. These needs are the same as those of the animal kingdom, i.e., food, sex, and survival. The fulfillment of these needs, or better, the subjection to and compliance with the natural laws that mandate them, does not achieve the realization of human existence, which is the awareness of the self. In pursuit of individualism and uniqueness, the wise ones violate and ignore natural law, subjecting themselves to the resultant penalties and consequences. In the example above, sitting on an airplane without exercising the functions of the body will cause muscle and joint atrophy, whereas a leisurely walk of many miles without time restraints would add to the health and vitality of the individual. The desired end is the destination. The human cost is the means that is not reasoned or calculated into the scenario, because it is not given the same value as is given to the satisfaction experienced at the end. Free-willed beings have no laws that they must obey, no instincts that guide them, and even less natural ability to accomplish their desires, which have little or nothing to do with natural law. There is no law of nature that presupposes or mandates happiness and the smile it produces in a human being. The uniqueness of the smile is the emotional end result of a preconceived desire being fulfilled. When no results are experienced which end in a smile, people refer to the natural laws to which they are beholden in an attempt to feel satisfied, which they perceive as balance and happiness. They know that eating satisfies the pangs of hunger, thus proving that there is always one end that can be satisfied through free agency. Therefore, as one example, when a human is sad because of the inability to reach the desired end of a preconception, they eat and eat and eat, something they can control by circumventing natural law, whereas animals eat to live, not live to eat. Some couples stay together, not because they necessarily like each other, but because they know through experience that the natural law that mandates sexual urges can be satisfied, and a semblance of balance and happiness can be achieved in doing so. Humans will always find ways to satisfy themselves temporarily, but rarely attain lasting happiness. The long-term effects of circumventing the laws of nature, which have been followed by all other animals for millions of years, are not measured when the expected standard is the end fulfillment of human behavior, happiness. Once a standard is set and accepted by the whole of humanity, it isn't long before exercising free will motivates an individual to set him or herself apart from or above the whole by attempting to change the established standard. The reason for continual scientific and technological advancement has little to do with what is best for the whole, but all to do with what will help promote individuality. To be the one who discovers the next great step in the standardization of human happiness lends to the constant desire to be recognized apart from the whole. Inventors, explorers, scientists, actors, musicians, athletes, business icons, or whoever differentiates and distinguishes themselves from others, all have one common goal: to become the one who sets the self apart from the rest. However, these personal goals are not shared by everyone. There are many, many wise ones who have no interest in setting themselves apart from others in this way, but have found their own happiness in other ways. They have no desire to outdo their peers, and consequently contribute little to the advancements of technologies that ostensibly support human happiness. Yet even so, they too, in their own way, seek individuality. Ironically, through their efforts to establish a universal standard of living by which all can benefit, the wise ones have created their own opposition and challenges which diametrically oppose the balance, happiness, they seek. From technological advancements, cities are developed and concentrated on small tracts of land where happiness is hardly experienced by their citizens. To escape urban sprawl and the crowding effects of these advancements, humans escape to the mountains, deserts, and other natural environs left unaffected by the standard of living effectuated by the wise ones and forced upon the masses. Humankind circumvents natural law and its environs in search of happiness, and then, ironically, returns to these same environs in their natural state to recapture and experience what they lost through their own actions. All humans want to experience happiness. Nothing is more soothing and provides more comfort than an unforced smile that comes as the result of a preconceived notion or desired goal being fulfilled. Goals are based on what is conjured up in the mind. They are images created by the desire to experience happiness, which are directly associated with the need to sustain individuality in a vast sea of humanity. From the moment a little girl, for example, is able to distinguish herself from others, she begins to establish fundamental concepts of her world and what she must do to maintain who and what she is, and what she should be when she becomes an adult. Human aspirations lead to miraculous discoveries intended to promote the concept of self-realization. Television, books, magazines, and predominantly the examples of adults around her who appear to a child as those who have a stable and secure self-image. Create images for the little girl. From these images, she formulates her desire to become someone or something that either fits securely within the standardized images or puts her above them. Her balance in life becomes dependent on her ability to reach the desired end of her preconceptions. She competes with thousands of her peers who also imagine themselves as the next great actress, model, musician, businesswoman, or president, each living her life, hoping to experience the end result of fulfilling her dream. For the majority of little girls, it will always just be a dream. Their lives will be spent in misery and stress as they attempt to realize a persistent but virtually hopeless illusion. These dreams are based on an image formed in their minds when they first entered a world shared by billions of others with the same quest, attempting to find out who and what they are as individuals. These young women are tragically convinced that they do not fit in properly, nor do they fulfill the purpose of their existence and find happiness unless their preconceived image becomes a reality. The image takes precedence over the natural laws that have been violated by the corruption of man. The dragon and the beast give life to this image, causing all upon the earth to worship and desire it above all else. A hope of a life of happiness has become dependent upon this image. Those who fail to live up to its expectations and standards lose this life. In essence, they are killed. Those who relentlessly pursue and worship this image have no rest day or night. Well has it been said of those placed above others as successful, rich, and living the quote-unquote dream, it is not in what is real, but it has all to do with the image. Chapter 5. The Mark. As humans attempt to exert themselves in discovering self-worth, they experience feelings, then develop attitudes, and then make choices of action. These actions, gestures, and other outward signs are how they define themselves as individuals in comparison to others. Likewise, humans define each other based on their own feelings and attitudes, whether or not the definition lends to a positive or negative impression. The overwhelming evidence of who a person is or what one has become remains long after he or she no longer exists among those who were affected by his or her existence. When a standard of human prominence or excellence is conceived or envisioned and accepted by a group of individuals, all others are measured by this standard. The group with the greatest physical strength and power sets the standard by which it expects all others to abide. If others do not live up to this level of quality accepted as the norm, they are branded as quote-unquote substandard and perceived as a threat to the view of the strongest. The strongest group is not necessarily the largest or the majority. It is merely the one that has the means of force available to subjugate all others to its standard. Humans create and raise flags as symbols of their standards, and by means of war, protect the flag upon which their standard is based. Judicial systems of law are created to protect the level of human behavior expected when one lives under the auspices of these flags and the governments that protect them. Force is used to take away the free will of the individual who lives contrary or substandard to the measure set by those who have the physical means to take away life or liberty. These systems of law generally do more to protect the image of the established measure than they do to protect the citizens' individual rights to become who and what they desire to become by use of their own free choice. When this is the precedent and purpose of law, and these laws are enforced by the threat of loss of life or liberty, the natural human is in a constant state of rebellion. This is because it is predisposed to set itself apart from others as an individual. When this standard is forced upon them, humans are thrown out of balance, experiencing unhappiness because they do not feel that their self-worth is validated by those attempting to force them to become someone or something they are not. When a standard has been set, a person must both support the standard and conform personal desires, attitudes, feelings, and gestures to the standard or mark set, or else be known as a nonconformist or criminal outside of the law. People are either known and remembered for how well they conform to the accepted standards or for rebelling against them. Therefore, by our actions, gestures, and outward signs, we fulfill the need to be valued as an individual by leaving our mark upon the society in which we live. Yet, when a human is not being true to the self, as is its natural tendency, a lasting happiness can never be achieved. Humans experience temporary satisfaction until they realize they are no longer individuals, but only a part of the whole. If one cannot gain a sense of self-worth by conforming to the laws of the whole and the accepted standard upon which they are predicated, then the natural tendency is to develop this self-recognition and worth by becoming an outlaw or a revolutionist determined to promote change or set a different standard. If the revolutionary movement develops strength and becomes physically stronger than the group that set the old standard, then the former flag is thrown down and another is raised in its place, setting a new standard to be enforced. Most people would rather conform than rebel. Behaving acceptably fulfills a human's desire to be valued as quote-unquote worthy based on compliance with the set standard. When there exists no hope for a revolutionary force of substantial strength to overthrow the powers that be, most will relegate and surrender in agreement with the old adage, if you can't beat 'em, join 'em. This submission may promise security and liberty, but does not guarantee peace and happiness. A temporary personal satisfaction occurs when a set goal is reached. But when attainment leads to a quote-unquote higher standard being set because someone has already reached and surpassed the original goal, complacency becomes the norm, and personal fulfillment the illusion. Unless one sees the self as an individual of value, he or she will constantly crave to assert the self as acceptable by set standards, or will desire to surpass these norms. At some point in human history, people were convinced that education was the appropriate standard. Obtaining some form of a distinguishing outward gesture allows a person to feel up to par with the set expectation of being educated. Degrees, titles, and honors were developed as outward symbols of conformity. Ironically, those who set the standard for education are the same ones who benefit from it. Professors do not disseminate quote-unquote education for free. Therefore, to leave their personal mark and set themselves apart from the rest of humanity, They convince others that their knowledge is, first, worth knowing, and secondly, worth another's time and money to find out about it. These are similar to the quote-unquote thugs who did not like to work in the fields doing menial labor that produced the basic needs for human survival. Instead of finding glittering gold in a stream to produce captivating pieces of jewelry, they invented the sparkle of an academic quote-unquote degree, which they then used to convince others of their self-worth and assert their individuality. Originally, farmers saw no benefit from sending their children to school when there were crops to harvest. However, seeing the leisurely life an educated quote-unquote professor enjoyed, they hoped their children would not have to work as hard as they did to survive and live up to the standard set by society. Hardworking parents sacrifice for their children and want them to conform to society in ways that they cannot, thus vicariously affecting their own individuality and self-worth by the mark left on society by their children. It was not long before farmers saw their children as valuable assets to the future of the human race, and more importantly, their own self-worth. Therefore, they became convinced that their children were in need of quote-unquote education. But if their children received this education, how would they continue to grow and harvest their crops? This dilemma was solved by finding other creatures who did not fit the standards set for their own children. Their darkened skin naturally classified them as quote-unquote substandard. In their natural state, these quote-unquote substandard creatures lived a lower quality of life with few organized and mandated laws. In comparison, their tribes were certainly quote-unquote uncivilized to those cultures established by the more quote-unquote civilized wise ones. According to the farmer, if these did not live like a quote-unquote normal human being, then they were not considered human, but were viewed as animals that could be domesticated and harnessed as beasts of burden. To leave his mark on the world, a rich farmer or merchant, for example, recognizes himself as quote-unquote wealthy or successful based on the amount of money or product he produces. His self-worth is then determined by the comparison made to other farmers and merchants of like trades who share the same personal goals. If he can convince others, as in the story of Ugg and Thug, that his products and services are beneficial to the whole, then he has made himself valuable and has set a mark for which others aim to reach or exceed. If he is powerful, because his club is bigger than another's, or his finger sits on a button that can launch a missile to take away life, he is in a position to protect this standard from any who disagree. At another time in history, a few rich farmers and merchants lived under a crown that set a royal standard expected of all citizens protected under the reigning king's criteria. They decided that in order to establish their self-worth and leave their mark upon society, they had to individually produce more abundantly and possess more than any other. Their standard was set just above the standard of their neighbor. Since each had the same goals, competition began to change the accepted measure until it became an unreachable illusion based on the desire of each to own the land next to his. To maintain his own standard, the king demanded by royal decree the payment of taxes on all that was produced by the rich merchants. The monarchical justification for a tax came from the expense of protecting the sovereignty of the said standard. Yet in his attempt to leave his own mark written in the annals of human history, The king's standard threatened the mark desired to be left by the quote-unquote rulers of some isolated colonial states. These rich quote-unquote colonial kings set their own standard under a new flag, which they presented to the world as the quintessential quote-unquote standard of freedom. At the time of this revolution, the wealthy colonists enjoyed most of the freedoms included in their declaratory and independent standard, except for one. They had to pay taxes to the king. The new quote-unquote kings, some refer to them as quote-unquote founding fathers, decided it would be more advantageous for them to have the people pay taxes to support their standard of living. Their quote-unquote standard included the ownership of land, slaves, those creatures who did not fit their standard, the payment of $300 each to avoid conscription for them and their children, and the exclusion of women and anyone else who didn't fit their measure in the right to vote for these quote-unquote standards. With bravado and patriotic rhetoric, these quote-unquote new kings, these wealthy farmers and merchants, have left their mark upon a world that has set them up individually and apart from others as some of the most courageous and intelligent wise ones the world has ever known. This mark has influenced a work ethic and level of quote-unquote excellence that is written upon the hands of all those who indulge in its pursuit. The mark has now become the primary thoughts and desires in the foreheads of their slaves. Slaves who do not consider themselves as such. This is because their quote-unquote new kings have convinced them that they are not forced to labor. Therefore, they are not slaves. Yet in reality, they are forced to labor in order to survive. With intelligent manipulation, these pseudo-slaves have been convinced by their masters that they too can leave their own mark upon the world by working hard in the various fields, so that one day they can be crowned a quote-unquote king too. However, as these slaves toil and labor for these quote-unquote kings, hoping to leave their own mark one day, they begin to see that the closer they get to arriving at the majestic standard, the further away it appears. This is because the quote-unquote king's level must be continuously set a little higher than the rest. Humans desire to be acknowledged and valued for who they are and what they do. The mark that is left by a human in pursuit of its individuality and self-worth is the name by which one person will be distinguished from all others in mortality and remembered after death. The vast extent and importance of the mark is substantiated by the works of the hands and the thoughts in the forehead of each individual. All have received this mark and are enticed to pursue a standard of excellence set by the illusion of human achievement. No one is immune from the innate desire to be of value and leave some symbol of a life lived with purpose and meaning. Whether that life is lived according to the standards set by others or by the individual. Humans are deceived by the miracles and the image presented by the beast, who receives its power from the dragon, which is supported by the corruption of man. Prominent in the right hand or upon the forehead of every free-willed wise one is the essence of the individual, the mark of the beast. Chapter 6. The Wrath of God. The consequences of human behavior are as natural and self-evident as the behavior itself. Free-willed in their ability and capacity to experience life without predetermined functions and instincts to mandate action, humans are directly affected by the decisions they make. In other words, they are right where they have decided to be. Though the effects of nature can force unexpected experience and circumstance upon all biological life subjected to its laws, humans are also independently affected by what they choose to do individually with their free agency. Besides being eaten by an animal higher up the food chain, no other life form has the secondary responsibility of suffering retribution for its actions. Conversely, neither does any other possess the ability to experience a sense of fulfillment when an individual choice reaches the desired end for which it was intended. If the laws of nature determine for the human being what actions need to be taken in order to maintain a consistent balance without allowing consequences like all other life, humans would exist for the sake of nature alone. Therefore, they would not be able to distinguish themselves separately from the whole. With their ability to reason and choose their actions without an inborn pattern of perfunctory behaviors, humans are able to experience a life full of consequences of their own choosing. Figuratively expressed, it's as if a human has been presented a table upon which there are two bowls. One is filled with fruit that tastes good, and the other is filled with bitter-tasting fruit. Because the fruits look the same on the outside, the determination of whether or not one fruit tastes better than the other can only be experienced by sampling each fruit. If the good fruit came from the same tree at the same season, the laws of nature would have already predetermined that all the fruit of the tree would taste exactly the same. Therefore, the bitter fruit either came from a different tree or at another time of season when the fruit was not quite ripe. The good fruit will always be chosen over the bad fruit. But in order to know the difference, when the outward appearance gives no apparent clue to its sweetness, one must be given the opportunity to choose from both bowls and determine for oneself which tastes better. If one is presented with a table upon which is placed only good fruit, there could be no comparison, and the degree of goodness could not be determined. If one continually ate from the bowl of sweet fruit, he or she would miss the opportunity to fully enjoy and appreciate the benefits that the opposition of the comparative experience would provide. Put another way, a father wanted his children to experience the great joy of eating a piece of good fruit. His children lived with him and ate effortlessly from his garden, in which there was every tree that was pleasant to the sight and good to the taste. He taught his children that they could eat of every tree in his garden except for one. The one from which they were not allowed to eat was a tree of good and bad fruit. The fruit on this particular tree was indeed pleasant to the eyes and most desirous to the soul, but eating the bad fruit would cause a lingering, bitter taste in one's mouth. There was no way, however, to tell whether it was sweet or bitter unless it was partaken of and tasted. The father knew his children were becoming unappreciative of his garden, and the effort he put into making sure there was always good fruit to eat. He knew his children would eventually take for granted the wonderful fruit available to them, unless they also tasted the bitter. A kind father would never allow his children to do something he would never do himself. However, He had already tasted the bad fruit and knew the difference. He knew his children would always wonder for themselves what could be so bad about a fruit that looked so good, so that he would not be blamed for the bad taste that would linger in their mouths. The father never told the children that it was permissible to eat the bad fruit so that they could appreciate the good. To allow them the opportunity to make the choice, if they wanted, the father went away and told his children to dress and keep the garden by themselves. Enticed by their individuality and a desire to encounter new things they had not yet experienced, some of the children began to dare others to partake of the fruit of the tree of the good and bitter fruit, to establish themselves as individuals, which is the character of their true nature. Some of the children ate the fruit of the forbidden tree and discovered it was wonderful to the taste. They took the fruit to others and told them it was good, and that they should eat it too. It wasn't long before they began to suffer from the lingering bad taste of which their father had warned them, but it was too late. They had tasted the fruit and couldn't get the terrible aftertaste out of their mouths. They would never distrust their father and partake of the fruit of that tree again. Humans have the instinctual ability to know what makes them happy and what does not. This knowledge allows them to make choices, the consequences for which they alone are responsible. With this ability to reason, which has been termed quote-unquote common sense, they are able to determine for themselves those things that perpetuate happiness and those that take away their happiness. In order to fully appreciate and understand the difference, no force, no unseen entity, and no advanced being from another galaxy intervenes to curtail the use of their free agency. As they experience the retribution for their actions, wise ones learn to value the actions that bring happiness and depreciate the actions that take away from their happiness. These constant experiences propel the human condition towards a universal acceptance of values and circumstances that perpetuate and sustain the end desire of human existence, happiness. With each step taken backwards in experiencing retribution for their actions, humankind takes 2 steps forward. The steps backwards do slow the progress and process of arriving at a consistent state of balance and happiness, but nonetheless, these negative experiences also continue it forward. If natural laws and forces, instincts, mandated eternal progression towards human development and learning, there would be depreciation in the value of the intended experience. However, the subsequent ramifications of this progression are the price that must be paid to satisfy the demands of the laws that guarantee happiness. These ramifications are the penalties, punishments, woes, and consequences of opposing goodness and happiness. Though many humans believe that these consequences are part of the essence and penalties of a just God, a righteous Creator cannot violate the very purpose for which He exists, to provide happiness for His creations. Therefore, it can be said that the quote-unquote wrath of God is nothing more than the non-intervention of more advanced and intelligent beings who could help but choose not to, which allows the actions of free-willed beings who are learning by their own experience about the hell they are creating for themselves. The corruption of man supports the dragon that breathes fire within and gives power to and keeps alive the beast, which has created the image that has left the mark upon all humankind, which suffers deservingly from the wrath of God. Chapter 7. The Patience of the Saints. Human existence is a continual battle to establish and maintain individuality. This innate struggle is the natural effect of self-awareness. The battle lines are drawn by the ability to reason logically and defend the desired position of self-worth and separation from others. Confronted with a daily realization that everyone else is fighting for the same end only adds to the human condition. This ever-present human conflict is intrinsic and exists within the conscious thoughts of the self. When one feels powerless over the armies of outward circumstance and the influences that clash with self-awareness, the natural tendency is to relieve the ensuing battle within by joining others outside the self and engaging an enemy that does not threaten individuality. When the individual becomes part of a whole, the deliberate or immediate need to reach self-realization no longer exists because the values of self-worth are defined as generalizations which exclude personal preference in favor of accepted norms. Lost on this battlefield is the conscious ability to maintain uniqueness and independence. Thus, to ease and ignore the inner conflicts that humans engage in to assert the self and find the balance to which they are naturally inclined, they look for battles outside of themselves. When others are found who have likewise given up the pursuit of individualism because of the outward pressures that fight against it, peer groups of equality are formed. Peer pressure has little to do with the demands that others have on an individual, but more to do with the desire to replace the losing battle of one with the concerted effort of several. A battle shout of many transforms the unheard cry of one into an emotional array of substance that brings perceived unity and fulfills the wish of being counted of worth. The first form of this unity comes when humans separate themselves from others into family units in which the parent's inability to realize self-worth is substantially decreased by the hope that the child will one day be of a greater value than them. No sacrifice is too great to assure the parent's self-worth by the success of the child. Parents spend their entire life savings to send their children to school for a college education to become either what they did not, or to meet or exceed what they have. The need to demonstrate a purpose for their lives forces poor peasants to sacrifice their safety for a better life for their children. Hence, the losing battle within is forgotten by the hope of their children's victory. Sibling rivalry threatens the unity desired by the parent. Each child, through its own effort to fulfill its true nature and become separate from the whole, jockeys for a position of individuality within the family. The fight within the child becomes a battle within the home. To relieve the pressures of the family, communities, cities, and nations become the battleground on which a continual effort to suppress the conflict within is supported. Nations rise up against other nations, creating wars of death and destruction, supported by the soldier whose individuality is forced into submission to the whole. In the pocket of each soldier is found a picture that justifies the killing of another human being, a photo of the family. Upon the mantle within the home, is found another picture that supports the same justification, the photo of, quote-unquote, our hero. Both the soldier and the family use the wise one's ability to reason to excuse the death of another in defense of their own self-awareness and individuality. Even when a war of death is not being waged to alleviate or replace the battle within, the constant yearning to establish the self continues. Competition in business, sports, and opinion becomes the arena in which the conflict persists. Humans try to assert the self in order to be recognized and singled out from the whole. The competition and drive to win by a favorite sports team replaces the patriotic allegiance to a nation that fights by war to conquer. Losing oneself in the pursuit of the pennant, the possession of the cup, or the relish of first place detracts from the emotionally depressive awareness that I am nobody, because when one's home team is number one, then I am somebody. Wars of opinion and words create religions, political parties, and other groups that assert themselves as clusters of lost and insecure people, seeking to find themselves by uniting with others who are in search of the same. Once dissolved into a molten mixture of humanity, people are cast into prefabricated forms that produce the opposite of human desire. Individualize. Thus, the desire to stop the war within creates a greater war without. To promote and create peace without, peace must first be experienced within. Feeling secure is the first step in finding peace. Giving no heed or attention to what goes on outside the self promotes the ability to establish self-confidence within and leads to security. When there is no comparison to what is outside, what is inside takes precedence over everything else. A quote-unquote kingdom set up within an individual is governed by its own crowned ruler, the self. Fortified with high walls and secure gates, it becomes a city of refuge and peace, in which only those allowed therein are able to take advantage of its protection. When threatened by those without its walls, the gates are shut, and fortified with a confidence that the king within is the greatest of all the kings of the earth. Humans who truly see themselves as distinct and unique individuals have reached self-awareness and have no need to look outside of the self for recognition or worth. There is no inward battle taking place, nor constant yearning to know oneself or be known of others. They see others as they see themselves, unique and distinct individuals fulfilling the measure of their creation. This self-awareness creates a calmness that is not affected by anything outside of the self. In patience, they wait for others to stop fighting, end the wars, and see what they have seen all along. We are all so different, which makes us all the same. Patience is best defined as the ability to tolerate being provoked or annoyed without complaint or loss of temper, and the ability to endure waiting or delay without becoming upset, persevering calmly when faced with difficulties. No matter what state of emotional duress is encountered by the enemy without, because of the corruption of man that supports the dragon, the beast, the image, or the mark left upon the field of battle, the armor worn during the final battle that protects against the wrath of God is made of the patience of the saints. Chapter 8. A Sharp Two-Edged Sword. The insistent determination of the wise ones to assert their individuality has propelled the human kingdom into a chaotic state of affairs that threatens its very existence. Under the auspices and power of but a few wise ones, the survival of the majority hangs precariously thin by a small thread unwoven from the tapestry of humanity. One end of the thread is held by a small percentage of human beings. At the other dangles the masses, who unknowingly are bound by a delicate link, which, if severed, would precipitate their downfall or their liberation. There is a sword that can cut both ways and sever the thread with one mighty blow. It can release the weight dangling from its unsteady point of attachment, giving solid ground to maintain its mass with stability. As it cuts, the thread is left dangling without purpose, held by those who are no longer needed to hold it up. The sword is truth. There are more than 6 billion human beings upon the earth at this time. Less than 1%, 60 million of these, hold the rest in chains of slavery and inequality from which there is no escape. The promise of becoming one of the elite, one of this blessed 1%, assures the efficacy of the rationale for the chains. Work hard enough in the fields of slavery, and one day you might become a master. Upon the wall, in plain view of the enslaved, hangs the key to their chains. It is not a tangible key, because there is no actual lock. It is the writing upon the wall that resonates in words that the chained cannot interpret for themselves. The truth shall set you free. Someone must boldly step forward without agenda and personal expectation, wielding the sword of truth in defense of the yoked. The sword will cut for the benefit of the poor, the meek, the downtrodden, and the exploited of the world. But for the exalted, who are those who live deliciously and fare sumptuously from the woes of others, the sword only cuts one way. Quote, "The lofty looks of man must be humbled, and the haughtiness of men bowed down. The sword of truth and justice must fall upon every one who is proud and lofty, and upon every one who is lifted up they must be brought low. Like glorious trees of both cedar and oak that are high and lifted up, the truth must fall them into splintered wood. It must fall upon the high mountains, and upon all the hills that are lifted up, and upon every high tower, and upon every fenced wall, which are the borders that keep the lofty isolated like islands of the sea. These mountains will flee at the truth, and the islands will be removed out of their place. It must fall upon all the ships which sail upon the sea of humanity, carrying treasures of silver and gold, the idols of man, from one port of merchandise to another. The truth must fall upon all the pleasant pictures painted by the brushes of selfish artists, who have colored beauty which they alone behold. The sword of truth will cause the loftiness of man to bow down, and the haughtiness of men to become low. For the truth alone must be exalted for freedom to reign. When the truth is revealed, a man will cast his idols of silver and his idols of gold, which were made each one for himself to worship, to the moles and to the bats which live in the clefts of the rocks, and on the tops of ragged stones. Who are these wise ones, and wherein are they to be accounted of? The mighty man and the man of war, the judge and the prophet, and the prudent and the ancient, the captain of 50, and the honorable man, and the counselor, and the cunning artificer, and the eloquent orator. These shall all cease, because their breath is in their nostrils, and the truth they have not known. The truth will exalt the children to be their princes, and babes shall rule over them." Unquote. Here is that truth. For every one person who can claim success in reaching the standard of accepted self-awareness and prosperity, 99 others suffer from the means used to achieve this prosperity without the ability to attain it for themselves. In the race to be counted of worth in a world of values and standards set to benefit those who set them, no notice is given to the devastating effects of the contest. Quote-unquote freedom is an abstract idea perpetuated by those in power over others. Evident forced slavery has simply been replaced with tacit slavery. Rising to the sound of a rooster's crow to harness the mule to the plow has been replaced with the obtrusive sound of an alarm clock that signals the beginning of another enslaved day. In both types of slavery, the wise ones are forced to work or they will die. The former was provided food, clothing, and shelter. The latter is given a piece of paper that must be exchanged for commodities owned by another slave owner. The slave's desire to live enriches the landowner for whom he or she works, and also the merchant from whom he or she must purchase life. The former was forced into chains if work and rules were not completed as established by the master. The latter is locked in a jail cell for the same reasons. Neither chose to be born into slavery. Each would have rather been born the child of a slave owner, one who never saw the butt end of a mule pulling a harrow, or the other who will never hear the sound of a time punch clock. Though modern owners do not outwardly display their employees as personal human property, the slave trade has transformed itself into a shared commodity of the corporations and wealthy of the world. Within the commercial organizations that buy and sell goods, make products, and provide services, there exists a proprietary implication that if a slave refuses to work for one business in order to remain alive, the rebellious runaway must submit to another. By running away from one plantation, the need to eat and be clothed and housed necessitates the acceptance of another. Chained ignorantly without lock or key, the writing on the wall has little effect on the minds of the wise ones, who see themselves as individual and equal human beings instead of slaves. Thus have they been convinced and deceived. The very essence of their innate human nature disallows the possibility that they can be controlled. They are convinced that it is possible that one day they, too, might own a business and have others work for them, forgetting their immediate state of enslavement by the illusory daydream of financial freedom and wealth. Day after day, their minds are gratified and lulled into a tempered calm as they toil in the fields, cubicles, and other employment they do not enjoy but have chosen by force. The quote-unquote dream satisfies their inner conflict by convincing them that it is possible to become a landowner. Hence, they are indeed equal to their masters who were once enslaved like them. The wise ones are not isolated to being slaves to the rich and powerful, but have also become indentured to their own desire to become a master. Quote-unquote getting ahead in the world has become the model of individuality. It becomes easier for them to alienate their minds from the conditions of poverty and destitution required at the bottom of the corporate chain, because of the image in their minds of future success and the opportunity to jump from the 99% to the 1%. The wise ones have become desensitized and pay no attention to human history that has paved a path of awareness to the place where this thin thread hangs, and demonstrates that the set percentages have never changed and never will. One wise one on top needs 99 others below in order to keep them buoyed up on the sea of humanity. Many of the 99 die with little notice or fanfare, and are soon replaced by other unknown faces, struggling to stay alive and hoping to one day reach the top. The ones pay no attention to the loss of faceless individuals they knew nothing about. Clothed in robes of excess and prosperity, they find no relevance in any matter outside the walls of their personal kingdom of gratification and family. The robes by which they are clothed came at a price, the cost of other human beings whose every breath stitched the woven threads of their contrived tapestries. In the torrid sun, the stones of the fields are removed by calloused hands. Sweat stings the eyes of those who work tirelessly, laboring until the sun gives way to a reprieve of darkness. 10. Each day the field is plowed, furrowed, and prepared for seed, which requires more sweat, more toil, and more death to produce the billowing soft fibers. 20. When nature takes its course and the mortality of verdant leaves becomes evident by the colors of harvest, more souls are tasked with the burden of collecting the crop. Nature's product is delivered to others. 30. Day after day, night after night, broken hearts and souls sit in the same position, separating and spinning the delicate fibers into thread. 40. Passed on to others who stand at the loom or the machines that have replaced it, the threads are woven into cloth using the same process every minute of every day of every year, expressing the apparition of a human shadow cast upon the loom until no distinction can be made between the two. 50. The cloth is cut and sewn by bent backs and fingers, sitting undaunted in dungeons of production, overseen by taskmasters who peer intrusively, assuring that no move is made that is not expected. The same moves expected yesterday, today, and tomorrow. 60. Checked for quality and packaged appropriately, the product is ready to be transported by redundant hands and hearts. 70. Transportation provides the means up the chain by following roads of boredom and melancholy, finally arriving to unload the cargo. 80. Received with pride and hope of profit, the changed and fabricated natural seed is proudly displayed with a learned sense of fashion by those whose hope resides in its marketable placement. 90. Unaware of the 99 people who brought it into being, the one out shopping sees the beautiful robe that is envisioned hanging next to the many others in the wardrobe of the one who will turn off the closet light, never giving a second thought from where each robe came. Money has become the determining value by which others are appreciated or depreciated among the wise ones. A brain surgeon spends his time studying and gaining experience to save lives. These doctors allow the slaves to remain well enough to continue working in the fields where they pick the strawberries and milk the cows, from which the scarlet fruits are covered with white delight to satisfy the surgeon's palate. Without something to eat, from where would the doctor get the energy to save lives? How many lives does he save in comparison to how many are saved by the produce of the hard-working field workers? It takes only one doctor to operate on a brain, but 99 migrant workers to assure the harvest doesn't spoil in the countryside fields. The one's worth is augmented not only by the values they have placed upon their own abilities, but also by the prospect that by the sweat of the brows of unseen others of lesser means, their worth can be increased. Appalling to human decency, corporations and capitalistic business enterprises offer stock in their companies to the ones, promising that by paying low wages, few benefits, and keeping the 99% in slavery, a healthy dividend will be paid for doing absolutely nothing. These stocks are more precious to the holder than the lives of the oppressed needed to create their value. To avoid personal accountability for actions deemed necessary in pursuing profit, the wise ones found a way to detach themselves from the stigma of greed and merchant despotism. The introduction of quote-unquote corporations and quote-unquote charitable foundations created entities as abstract as the values placed upon them. Corporations are groups of wise ones acting as a single entity with one purpose only: profit. Charitable organizations are set up to bring value to the ones who set them up or donate to them, with attempts to hide profits and deceive themselves and the rest of the 99 that by what they are doing, they are solving the world's problems without taking away the purpose for which they are established. Corporations and charitable foundations cannot acknowledge that the real problem is slavery, and they do absolutely nothing about this. Profit is the monetary worth that remains after the value of the 99 has been subtracted from the value of the 1. To increase the sum of this insensitive equation, the value of either the 1 or the 99 must be decreased proportionally to obtain the desired amount of profit. Since corporations and foundations have replaced the 1, or better, the ones have become the corporations and foundations, and most business laws protect and secure the value of the person founding these entities, only one determinant is left to be lowered to increase the overall profit. The equation is corporate/foundation value minus human value equals profit. These entities will not, by choice, devalue themselves. Therefore, the only determinant left to be reduced is human value. At length, there are those who awaken from the deep sleep into which they have been lulled by the carnal security provided by their master. By the light of day, they see the hopelessness in reaching the top of the chain. They witness others clambering over each other, dragging each other down in their attempt to reach the top. They realize that they have been deceived by the master, and that there is no lock on their chain. Cast aside, the chain no longer has significance to the individual state of existence. Yet without it, they will die. So they fight the masters, determined to proclaim their independence from the chains by which they were bound. But their sticks and stones are no match for their masters' whips and weapons. They either submit or are killed. These are seen as rebellious criminals, terrorists, or insurgents who have no hope of being valued by others for what they refuse to do. So they gain value in their own eyes by what they decide to do for themselves. They did not set the standard and values by which they have been judged by others. They had no part of the decision made between two wise ones insistent on perpetuating their own value by creating the standards. Hitherto forced into existence, they must submit the identifying nature of their souls to the will of others' expectations. Submit or die is a far cry from the liberty inalienably guaranteed by free will and the ability to recognize the self. Submit to what? To the self-evident realization that one wise one is not considered as good as another? Can this submission transcend the feeling of knowing that the self exists independently because of its ability to think and recognize itself? Claiming one is better than another prioritizes the worth of existence, thus giving credence to the imposed reality that supremacy negates the lives of those considered inferior. The 99 do not exist to the 1. Many years might pass before the 99% finally realizes that they are not valued by the 1% as equals. But as they do, a revolution of thought replaces their inner struggles with wars and rumor of wars, demanding that they are recognized and valued as equal human beings. Unfortunately for the masses, even if the majority possess powerful handheld weapons and the physical strength to wield them against the minority, technological superiority allows just one to be at the controls of a warplane or nuclear weapon and quash any revolution of the greater number. The one will always rule and set the measures, the values, and the standard to which the 99 must submit or be killed. What is needed is for the 99 to appoint one to represent them, who becomes the anointed one, having the power and knowledge to represent all equally. This chosen one must possess the gentle nature of a lamb to assure equality and fairness to all, but brandish a sword from which none are immune from the strength of its blow. This quote-unquote anointed one is truth and justice for all equally. The patience of the saints await the triumphant day when the corruption of man, which supports the dragon, the beast, the image, and the mark, all which caused the wrath of God, are subdued by the sharp two-edged sword of truth and justice. Chapter 9. The End of Times. Faced with a continual battle in order to maintain, assert, and protect individuality, humankind finds itself precariously close to being destroyed from within. Complete annihilation appears to be the destination humans are headed for along a path of self-protection and defense of the human ego. This quote-unquote ego is the wise one's idea of his or her own importance and worth compared to others. Some have an exaggerated sense of their own importance and a feeling of superiority over other people. This minority threatens and exploits the majority of humankind. Nevertheless, all struggle incessantly with the universal reality of existence, empirically expressed in the self by the adage, quote, I think, therefore I am, unquote. It is in how an individual thinks that threatens the very essence of the am, therefore established. How a person thinks about the self determines how one is treated, and also how others are treated. Self-deprecating thoughts can destroy an individual, whether by drugs, alcohol, overeating, or allowing the natural urges of sex to overwhelm normal thinking patterns. This destruction occurs when the physical body and its needs become the main focus of existence. When this focal point has been established within the mind of the individual, the point of thinking is missed, and therefore the point of existence also. Thinking has absolutely nothing to do with the physical body. If it did, then those with the greatest minds would have the greatest physical attributes. As human egos go, those who spend their existence in pursuit of improving the physical nature of the body can lack in the ability and exercise of thinking. Conversely, those wise ones who are distinguished by others as being quote-unquote full of wisdom are not generally considered as physically beautiful to the preconceived standards of the human eye. The human world has become inundated with the idea of beauty, thus perpetuating an image of the self based on the outward physical body. It has done this in hopes of establishing a value and worth to individuality. Beauty magazines promote low self-esteem when the models, who are paid generously to become the image of human perfection, are seen and revered by those whose natural physical body will never be worthy of the measure that has been set. Natural aging brings depression and hopelessness, adding to the invented belief that an individual does not exist unless the self stands out in the eyes of others. Physical goals of asserting and defending the self are perfectly in line when dealing with the reality of individual existence, but they have created a new adage, quote, I am, therefore I don't need to think, unquote. The thinking has already been done for humans in the standards and measures set by the society into which they have come into existence. These have replaced individuality, the essence of free will, with forced submission to the whole, thereby negating existence by not allowing the expression of the individual. Those who do not meet the standards and measures established are removed from the whole. Ironically, it is this imagined reality that will eventually lead to the extinction of the human race. When the more physically powerful groups of wise ones destroy the weaker ones, all that will be left is a group of beings continually fixated on asserting, maintaining, and protecting the self in spite of the group. The bacteria of human ego will destroy the whole from within. Natural law cannot be superseded and replaced with inventions that work against it. Free-willed entities must be allowed to be who and what they are, or by their free will, the natural course of their existence will end. New ways are found to improve the outward physical body in order to get closer to the set standard of perfection. Disregarding inward needs, faster and more efficient ways are discovered to destroy human life through warfare. These advancements in technology have the potential of destroying humankind from within and without. Human salvation can only come in respecting the self and supporting its right to exist separately from others. We must learn to do unto others what we would have them do unto us. Or better, we must allow others to exist and pursue who they are as they desire, as we would want them to allow us to exist and pursue who we are. We cannot establish standards of beauty, education, monetary success, and other measures in order to define the value and worth of an individual. We cannot set expectations for human existence if we want to allow others to exist as we do. When a free-willed wise one is born into a world that has already determined what must be done in order to establish oneself as a viable human being, it becomes unstable and unhappy. This is because it cannot maintain the natural balance that makes it a wise one and not an animal. It cannot be forced into submission against its free will and its ability to use its reason, thinking, to determine who and what it is as an individual, and still maintain balance. It must be allowed free agency and the right to exercise this agency in order to fulfill the measure of its creation, individuality. The wise one cannot be told what beauty is, but must be allowed to use its reasoning capabilities to determine its own perception. It must defend its individuality when it does not meet the expectation and standard of beauty others have instituted. The balance of peace and happiness comes from being amongst others who see each individual as beautiful, no matter if the appearance of another is different from their own. Seeing the beauty in others as they would like others to see theirs. A free-willed being cannot be forced to survive as a slave. Becoming part of a worldwide conglomerate of corporate greed and profit. The planet does not exist by the laws of nature just to maintain the individuality of only one, but of all life thereupon. The natural resources of the earth cannot be controlled by one individual's assertion of self without regard to everyone else's natural prerogative to claim the same right. Imaginary lines, borders, cannot be established, making one group's pursuit and support of individuality of more worth than another's, nor can the resources of Earth be owned and controlled within these pretended boundaries. If the laws of nature create a life, then these same laws must support it. All wise ones are equally endowed with the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as each desires by exercising his or her own free agency. Only when laws, statutes, expectations, and standards are instituted to guarantee this will there be established a foundation of peace and happiness that will bring balance to the human existence. Groups of some cannot be allowed to create their own standards and force these standards upon others whom do not agree with them. Those groups who create illusory lines, borders, that separate one human from another also invent imaginary entities that transcend the ability to be controlled by the logic of human reason. This creates emotional borders that are enforced with the same hate and prejudice as physical borders. Any religion or God that does not support the law of allowing the free will of another and does not teach its followers to do the same does not support the essence or reality of existence. If it does not teach one to react or to not react in a way that supports an individual's right as long as theirs is not being influenced, then it does not exist itself or cannot be allowed to exist and destroy the peace of humankind. Abstract material value, money, cannot create a measuring stick by which individuality is calculated, nor can it be a requirement for existence when life itself is free. In order to establish peace and happiness, all wise ones must be freely provided with the means to exist: food, shelter, clothing, and health care. These things structure the quote-unquote guarantee of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Without this assurance, the true essence of life, self-awareness, loses its meaning. Liberty is counteracted by servitude to those who place their own quote-unquote life above that of others. Happiness becomes a hope and ambition instead of the natural balance of life. The wise ones must utilize their free will and unique ability to reason in order to stop inventing things that protect individuality, and instead use this intelligence and dominion over the natural world to support it. Protecting one's own life and individuality without regard for the protection of others creates fear, war, and destruction, while supporting life and guaranteeing equality in the pursuit of individuality lays a foundation of peace that leads to lasting happiness. This foundation must come from a worldwide effort that transcends nationality, race, religion, pride, and personal ego in order to address the human problem of inequality, hopelessness, and unhappiness. The 99% majority must unite and demonstrate to the powerful 1% that controls their destinies and has disregarded the guarantee of life, a solidarity of strength and resolve. They must demand the premise of human decency. All humans are created equal. However, the powerful minority cannot be denied what the majority is demanding of them either. They also have a right to wealth, pride, prestige, and distinction, and anything else their egos require of their free will. What can be insisted upon is that the powerful use of their might and authority to support the individualism of all people by turning the effectiveness of their ability to make war and conquer into eliminating the struggle of human existence, turning their swords into plowshares. If a wise one is allowed to exist in freedom, his or her natural course will fulfill the reason for human existence, happiness, and allow it to be properly experienced. Religious prophets and social pundits have made various attempts throughout human history to eliminate poverty and inequality. There is only one human organization that has ever been founded on the premise of worldwide equality and the guarantee of food, shelter, clothing, and healthcare to all wise ones. This organization has the proper formula needed to succeed. It is the Humanity Party. See humanityparty.com. This united effort is the last chance for the species of wise ones to stop their decline and spiral into chaos, turmoil, and emotional and physical destruction. United, the people of the earth can solve their own problems and reinstate the preamble of their existence. We are free-willed beings with the ability to reason and use our free agency to establish our own individuality. If we cannot do it for ourselves, the only hope is that a wise one who lives on another planet where peace and happiness is the norm, and who has much more wisdom, power, and knowledge than us, will come to this earth and save us from ourselves. This will be done by establishing supreme law and order based on the proven universal principle. Value others as you value yourself. The end of times of war, inequality, and unhappiness must cease, or the end of times of the human race will come. In the words of a wise one who knows, quote, "Even so, come," unquote. Chapter 10, Revelation Unfolded. Author's Note. After reading this section, the reader will be left with no doubt that the great beast presented in the New Testament book of Revelation is the United States of America. It will be known that all human beings have the mark of the beast in their right hand and or forehead. There will be no doubt what has caused the human condition upon this earth and the problems that are associated with it. And there will be no excuse to not do what must be done to solve these problems. The book of Revelation holds up a mirror in which the world can view its own reflection. Lost from our memories are our childlike reflections and the remembrance of anything beyond the first light that warmed our eyes in a strange new world. Our birth signaled the beginning of a journey in which our travels would lead us each down a different path. While traveling on these paths, we become lost. We join others on their paths, only to find that theirs is not our own. Once we realize that only our own path can take us where we want to go, we struggle continually to stay on it. But exactly what are we looking for? Are we not searching to find our true self within? Do we not seek to see, once again, the reflection of who we truly are individually, not as the rest of the world sees us, but as we saw ourselves before the definitions and expectations of the world consumed our minds and made us into someone we are not. We deeply long to see ourselves the way we saw the carefree child smiling back at us when we first noticed our image in a mirror. As we grow and continue down our chosen paths, the lines of experience begin to crisscross our face like a road map, not showing us where to go, but only showing us where we have been. We begin to see the reflection in the mirror as something we are not. Our reality is affected by the illusory image staring back at us, and we become convinced that what we see is who we truly are. These wrinkles are well worn into our face. We see these creases as flaws in our real self, not realizing they were created from the natural course we have followed in becoming what we have become. We have created the wrinkled roadmap by following the path we have chosen for ourselves. In essence, we have caused our own suffering. The causes of human suffering become overwhelmingly real and inexcusable as we look at the face staring back at us, expecting to see the serenity and balance we once knew as a child. The mirror reflects the image of a being created from the passions and propensities of human nature that devour anything in their way. At the same time, our natures motivate us to search for happiness and a confident self-realization that we are equal to everyone else. In this way, we feel secure in what we see in the mirror. No one doubts that the world at large is deteriorating as fast as it is progressing. As we discover new technology, strive for freedom, and connect via the internet, television, and other advanced communication processes, we are uniting unlike any other time in recorded world history. But uniting for what purpose? Never has there been such a rampant disregard for human life or the Earth's environs. Life and survival have created a delicate balance between the natural world and the emotional world we have imagined to find our happiness. The Book of Revelation is a masterpiece painted by John the Beloved that reveals the causes and effects of human nature. As with any masterpiece, the artistic expression and medium used by the painter is unique and can only be understood completely by the artist himself. Some of us look at contemporary quote-unquote masterpieces with contempt by comparing them to a child's work. Others look in awe at the colors, contours, lines, shades, and patterns, speculating and imagining the real intent of the artist, thus creating an illusory masterpiece in their own minds. In a similar manner, some see the Book of Revelation as a montage of illusionary creatures and situations created from the imagination of a religious, quote-unquote, Van Gogh, while others, who are unimaginative and uninspired fearmongers, see it as a literal prophecy of future world events because of what they interpret as the world's wickedness. John the Beloved wrote Revelation in the early part of the 4th century. By then, he had witnessed human nature from a perspective that could only be drawn from many years of experience living among the different peoples of the earth. John's 2,000 plus years of longevity is implied by Christ's words in the following verses. Quote, "Then Peter, turning about, seeth the disciple whom Jesus loved following, which also leaned on his breast at supper, and said, Lord, which is he that betrayeth thee? Peter, seeing him, saith to Jesus, Lord, and what shall this man do? Jesus saith unto him, If I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? Follow thou me. Then went this saying abroad among the brethren, that that disciple should not die. Yet Jesus said not unto him, He shall not die, but if I will that he tarry till I come, what is that to thee? This is the disciple which testifieth of these things, and wrote these things. And we know that his testimony is true. And there are also many other things which Jesus did, the which, if they should be written every one, I suppose that even the world itself could not contain the books that should be written. Amen. Unquote. John chapter 21, verses 20 through 25. Only two means of proof would satisfy both skeptics and believers. One would be John's revealing himself to the public and allowing science to verify that advanced beings manipulated his genetic patterns, beings who knew how to use their knowledge of genetic engineering to change the course of human flesh and eliminate aging. The other means would be for a complete and comprehensive explanation to be given of the masterpiece he penned, which is precisely what transpired to produce this book. How else could it be possible to unfold these mysteries, since only John knows why he wrote what he did? Only he knows what each metaphor and figurative expression represents. For as long as the book of Revelation has been studied by apocalyptic and eschatological students and teachers, there have been numerous attempts to unlock the mystery of Revelation. Though many would like to take credit for attempting to reveal its mysteries and John's original intent, all have failed miserably because John was not the source of their information. In contrast, the integrity of this work is maintained, and the claim that the author was taught personally by John himself is substantiated, as this book realizes the purpose for which it was written, to explain exactly what John intended and to unfold all of the symbolism he used in the presentation of his message. John's intent was to hold up a mirror in which we could each view the image of the creature that we call a human being. John presents the image as a compendium of natural or fleshly desires. These desires are continually burning with fear, hate, discord, strife, and all that fights against the essence of our true inner longings for peace and happiness. The rising smoke from the fires of our fleshly desires stings our eyes, filling them with tears that distort our vision of reality, and blinding us to the truth that we alone are responsible for providing the fuel for the fire that consumes us. The rising smoke also creates clouds and mists of darkness, which shield us from the light of truth. These clouds and mists of darkness have spread throughout the entire earth. No light can be found anywhere. No religions, no spiritualists, no learned ones, no psychics, no popes, bishops, priests, leaders, no gurus or self-proclaimed experts have lit a candle with sufficient illumination to reflect the image. We stare blankly into the mirror. In darkness, self-appointed prophets and teachers have invented religions, theories, philosophies, and illusory imaginations of what the image should look like, soothing the eyes and ears of those who hold them up as torches by which to see. In spite of the clouds and mists of darkness, there has always been a source of light. The sun has never stopped fulfilling the purpose of its creation. It warms and gives life to the earth. But when clouds of darkness prevail, the light of the sun is hidden. However, the earth is not left alone. The moon majestically reflects the light of the sun, casting its light upon those who sit in darkness. Only by the light of the moon can people in darkness begin to see their true reflection. Alas, people of the world sit comfortably in houses they have fashioned for themselves, houses built upon sandy foundations with no hope of surviving the slightest tremor of a living earth. Inside these houses, the people sit in repose, uninterested in the light of the moon. People utilize artificial lights they have invented for themselves to illuminate their darkened state. They have been convinced that they do not need the natural light given by the sun, the moon, and the stars. Nevertheless, the moon is always there, reflecting the light of yesterday and portending the light of tomorrow. Though eclipsed by the earth during its different stages, there has always been a moon set in the darkened sky to illuminate a path for those who choose to follow it. The Apostle John was alive when Jesus Christ was upon the earth, carrying a lamp as he journeyed with Jesus in a darkened land. John filled it with the oil he received from this natural vine. For hundreds of years, he covered his lamp as he lived among the earth's inhabitants. Like a golden candlestick on which a flame still burns after hundreds of years, John's lamp remains lit. It would light the world if it were not hidden among a group of writings accepted by the masses as a source of all truth. It has become known as the Book of Revelation. His lamp is unable to give its light and warmth because of the dark robes and dark suits worn by the religious leaders who stand in front of it, keeping the people from seeing its light. The books of the New Testament were not selected, edited, and collated until hundreds of years after the death of Jesus. John was still alive then, and in disguise, visited those responsible for its canonization. His writings were profound. They gave the editors a different view of Jesus' ministry than that which had been passed down from one generation to the next. John also delivered his manuscript for his revelation to the editors, knowing that they would never comprehend its meaning because of the symbolic and metaphorical way in which it was written. In this way, John maintained the integrity of the manuscript for hundreds of years. To truly understand Revelation, we must recognize and acknowledge that with our fleshly desires, we have created the beast, the monetary system that perpetuates and assures inequality, poverty, and human misery. We have its mark in our right hands and in our foreheads. We worship its image. We possess the number of its name, and we have created the hell from whence it came. It is time to stand aside, those of you who are dressed in cloaks of darkness, and allow the flame from John's lamp to give its light unto all who are in the house. Christopher. Revelation Unfolded. Introduction. The revelation of John has never been taken lightly by those who profess Christianity. However, there has never been a clear indication that what was included in the New Testament canon as the Book of Revelation is what John actually intended to write. Not only did he write in a different language than that in which the text has been modernly translated, but there is no way to make an absolute verification of his translated words unless a person has access to the original manuscript written by John's own hand. The author of this book has taken the time, done the research, and has the means whereby he is able to translate John's words as they were intended and came forth from his pen. With this accurate translation, John's words presented in the book of Revelation come alive with clarity, which allows for a more concise rendering of what was truly meant. Upon reading John's message with the plain and precious meanings properly revealed, it truly becomes the greatest and most important given prophecy ever written for the end of times. It is necessary to understand that John prepared his words, knowing they would be fulfilled in the latter days. Keeping this in mind will help one come to a better understanding of John's revelation. To fully and properly comprehend his message, one must approach it from John's point of reference. John has two main points of reference from which he formulated his thoughts and words into the presentation of his message. 1. The truth, or reality, and 2. The Old Testament. From these 2 points of reference came John's entire message, as all the symbolism and figurative expressions used by him can be found in Old Testament writings, which were the only form of written scripture available in his day. Revelation is divided into 3 purposeful and intended sections, which as a whole give a figurative presentation of the salvation offered by God to the human race. The first section, chapters 1 through 4, describes the general state of human nature, calling upon humankind to overcome this nature and repent of its corrupted state. The second section, chapters 5 through 13, shows the effects of human nature on the physical world, and most importantly, on each other. The last section, chapters 14 through 22, comprises the solution to the problems caused by human nature. The commentary provided allows the reader access to insight and information needed to easily and completely understand the book of Revelation. A complete understanding cannot be attained unless the reader begins at the first part of John's message and continues to the end. Skipping parts or jumping from section to section will lead to confusion and misunderstanding, which is the way in which Revelation is currently understood by religion and learned by students of New Testament writings. The easiest way to understand what John has presented, both figuratively and symbolically in his writings, is to have the secrets and mysteries of God explained. This knowledge and understanding has been revealed throughout time to true prophets of God, but each has been laid under a strict command to only reveal those things allowed and relevant to his particular day and age. Quote, "Surely the Lord God will do nothing, but he revealeth his secret unto his servants, the prophets." Unquote. Amos chapter 3, verse 7. There has never been a time in the history of this world when the minds of humans have been prepared to have the mysteries of God revealed in plainness. With the advancements in technology and the access to information currently available to the human race, it is no longer necessary to keep the many mysteries of God, quote-unquote, sealed from the understanding of his creations. Had these same mysteries been revealed in the days of the ancient prophets, the people would have killed them for blasphemy and gross heresy spoken against the accepted religious doctrines and precepts accepted as truth in their day. Even though the prophets kept the truth, quote-unquote, sealed in the symbolism of their writings, they were still killed because they spoke against the religious leaders and false prophets to whom the people looked for guidance and direction, and who received money and adoration for their deception. All prophets of God were misfits of society, who the majority of people despised and cast out because they preached repentance and doctrines that opposed what their accepted leaders taught. Modern times are not much different. The mysteries of God are, quote unquote, unsealed and revealed in these writings. This understanding and plainness deflates and upends the authority and claims of all religious leaders and spiritual gurus who have set themselves up above the people for material or social gain as a quote-unquote light on a candlestick. It is expected that the masses thus blinded will rise up in rebellion and anger against this message of truth, as it explains the book of Revelation in a plainness and simplicity never before known. Though organized religions of the world and self-proclaimed experts might rise up, fight, and reject these truths and unfolded revelations, their disagreement does not negate the truthfulness and wondrous glory of the mysteries of God presented in the book of Revelation. Now, for the very first time in the history of the world, and as an introduction to the continued explanation of John's revelation, here is a mystery of God that all prophets have known since the beginning of time. In our universe, there exists an infinite amount of dark space and dark matter in which are an infinite number of galaxies. Quote-unquote dark matter can be best described as matter that is composed of elements scientists have not yet discovered and do not understand. There is no part of the universe in which there is not some form of matter, as there is no such thing as emptiness. For even when a clear glass stands empty to the human eye, it is still filled to its brim with the matter that makes up air, i.e. oxygen, nitrogen, argon, and other trace minerals named by the primitive understandings of modern human scientists. Each galaxy is comprised of a finite, yet enormous number of solar systems. Each solar system is comprised of a finite number of planets. Dark matter and dark space have always been. The universe has always been. Though continually being created throughout the endless universe, galaxies have always been. Solar systems have always been. Eternal laws have always been. Life has always been. Eternal means just that. Eternal. No beginning and no end. Eternal laws ensure a course of balance called happiness. All elements, all matter, and all things obey eternal laws. The greatest source of happiness is experienced by free-willed beings who can consciously and through their own agency utilize eternal law for their individual happiness. Therefore, the eternal purpose of all things is to arrive at a state of eternal happiness, which can only be achieved by arriving at a state of eternal existence, currently expressed for our understanding as, quote-unquote, resurrection and eternal life. Human beings who have progressed and advanced to the ultimate level of potential to experience happiness can be referred to as quote-unquote gods. If we are children, creations of God, then it follows that the course of our nature is to become like our Creator, thus all becoming godlike in nature, or according to eternal law, all achieving eternal happiness according to our individual desires of happiness. This state of happiness occurs through both physical and mental progression when we view God from the perspective that He is a profoundly advanced human being and represents the end of our own eventual eternal state of being. Quote, "And God said, Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth. So God created man in his own image, and in the image of God created he him. Male and female created he them." Unquote. Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 through 27. If humans are created in the image of God, and males and females are this image, then this appropriately implies that quote-unquote becoming as gods is not restricted to male beings only, but also includes female deities. Quote, "For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil." Unquote. Genesis chapter 3, verse 5. Quote, "Then the Jews took up stones again to stone him. Jesus answered them, Many good works have I showed you from my Father. For which of those works do ye stone me? The Jews answered him, saying, For a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, and because thou, being a man, makest thyself God. Jesus answered them, Is it not written in your law, I said, Ye are gods? If he called them gods, unto whom the word of God came, and the scripture cannot be broken, say ye of him, whom the Father hath sanctified and sent into the world, Thou blasphemest, because I said, I am the Son of God? If I do not the works of my Father, believe me not. But if I do, though ye believe not me, believe the works, that ye may know and believe that the Father is in me, and I in him." Unquote. John chapter 10, verses 31 through 38. Quote, "For though there be that are called gods, whether in heaven or in earth, as there be gods many and lords many, but to us there is but one God, the Father, of whom are all things, and we in him, and one Lord, Jesus Christ, by whom are all things, and we by him." Unquote. 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 5 through 6. Quote, "Wherefore thou art no more a servant, but a son, and if a son, then an heir of God through Christ. Howbeit then, when ye knew not God, ye did service unto them which by nature are no gods. But now, after ye have known God, or rather are known of God, how turn ye again to the weak and beggarly elements, whereunto ye desire again to be in bondage?" Unquote. Galatians chapter 4, verses 7 through 9. God is a highly advanced and eternal being who uses the eternal laws of nature to do his work. His work is to bring about the eternal happiness of all those whom he creates. He has a body comparable to our human body that does not age or sicken, nor is otherwise corruptible. When Jesus Christ appeared to his disciples as a resurrected being, he demonstrated the type of body an eternal God has. His disciples testified of this mystery. Quote, "So then after the Lord had spoken unto them, he was received up into heaven, and sat on the right hand of God." Unquote. Mark chapter 16, verse 19. Quote, "And it came to pass, while he blessed them, he was parted from them, and was carried up into heaven." Unquote. Luke chapter 24, verse 51. Quote, "Jesus saith unto her, Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father, but go to my brethren, and say unto them, I ascend unto my Father, and your Father, and to my God, and your God." Unquote. John chapter 20, verse 17. Quote, And when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And when they looked steadfastly towards heaven, as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven. Unquote. Acts chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. Common sense would tell us that Christ is not sitting behind a cloud, nor is he on any planet in our solar system. He was transported to another planet in another solar system relatively close to our own, but far more progressed and advanced than ours. There he waits the day of his return to the earth to usher in the last phase of our mortal existence, known as the millennium. Christ is not the creator of our spirits or solar system, but was created by our quote-unquote Father to be the overseer of our solar system. Therefore, he can be appropriately called our God, being one who acts as God would act. Each solar system has its own anointed one, a Christ, who was prepared and put into authority by God to make sure the eternal laws are followed in all things in the small section of the universe placed under his direction. He was appointed, or better, created by our Creator to serve us by teaching us the things we need to know and do to find happiness, which comes in the way we associate with each other. The role of a Christ is to teach us how to treat each other so that we can live eternally in peace and happiness. In other words, so the use of our free will brings us happiness, and also happiness to those around us. There is nothing mysterious to God, but only to man in his veiled infancy. His plan follows logic, reason, and all the natural laws to which we are all subject, and his understanding of these laws gives him a power that we are only beginning to understand. Humans have the knowledge to create a nuclear weapon so powerful it can take the life of every living person. God has the knowledge and power to create a sun that gives life to every single organism upon this planet. John's message given in the book of Revelation and sealed from the knowledge of humankind until now is an unveiling of this great mystery of God pertaining to our universe and the eternal design of our happiness. Presented herein for the first time in recorded history are John's words as he intended them, with commentary from this author, who received the commission and understanding from none other than John himself.
The world is spiraling out of control. Pandemics, famine, war, protests, and hopelessness confront humanity on all sides. Where hope is the intrinsic measure of our humanity, or better, that which we feel can be possible in spite of the improbabilities that seem to be part of our present experience, hopelessness still prevails throughout the world. We are the real Illuminati. We are not part of any of the groups that advertise and present themselves as being part of a special illuminated group of people. We are the real Illuminati. Our group has existed since the dawn of humanity. We have acted and act behind the scenes of public exposure without disclosing our true identities. We desire no accolade or praise. We have one desire only: to help save humanity. Those who fear us present our group as evil, untrustworthy, and engaged in nefarious undertakings meant to cause malevolence in order to disrupt peace. Those who fear us for the secret combinations of political, business, and religious powers that control the minds and hearts of the masses. These fear our group because we seek to expose these combinations for what they really are and how they are the cause of all of humanity's problems. Government leaders throughout the world divide the people of Earth into prideful pockets of nations, countries, and tribal communities that are taught to hate and distrust all other governments that are not controlled by these political leaders. Economic powers combine in secret to control the means of exchange without upholding a fiduciary responsibility for all of humanity equally. Extreme poverty and economic inequality and disparity are the result. The most destructive of the secret combinations of power is that of the religious authorities that control the minds and hearts of the masses. These cause division and hate without regard or respect for any other belief other than their own. Our goals are to oppose superstition, to oppose obscurantism, to oppose the negative religious influences over public life and also the abuses of state power. It is our intent to end the machinations of the purveyors of injustice, to influence and control them without taking away anyone's free will. We need to earn the trust of the people of the world. To do so, we have written a book, a new American scripture, how and why we, the real Illuminati, created the Book of Mormon. This book is our case against one of the wealthiest religions on earth, a religion that has used the above-mentioned secret combinations of power to become what it is today. In this free-to-download book, we provide indisputable evidence that our group was solely responsible for what is known throughout the world as the Book of Mormon, a new American scripture first published in 1830 while the United States was establishing itself as one of the greatest nations on earth. It is our desire to come out of obscurity and from behind closed doors and share what we know and what we are doing with the people of Earth in an effort to save humanity from what appears to be imminent destruction. We are the real Illuminati.
Welcome to the marvelous work and a wonder. At no time during the history of our world has a place existed where a person can go and ask any question about their human existence and have that question answered with authority, clarity, and completeness. Many of the great and marvelous things that have been hidden from our understanding since the foundation of this world will be revealed. We've always known these real truths. They exist, hidden in the back of our mind within the confines of our imagination. Within the human mind, seeds of imagination sprout into belief systems of philosophy and religion. But these do not answer the basic questions of our existence. Who are we, and why do we exist? Religion and philosophy have produced fruits of discord, prejudice, and hate. These things are destroying our humanity. The purpose of the marvelous work and a wonder is to introduce the real truth about our existence as human beings. Within its answers, the solutions to our human problems are found. Most of our problems are a cause of our ignorance, and our current experience upon this earth manifests the influence of this ignorance. The marvelous work and a wonder is where current reality meets real truth.